1,000 folks who appreciate you and they're excited to hear more and support this project. We had a bunch of folks that sent in questions, and I'd love to ask you a few. First, a lot of people ask how you came to this role. Some asked about your experience reading the book for the first time, and many on the line, including Victoria Johnson, Joan Allen, Danica Perry, and more, we see you, wrote in asking about what drew you to this story in the first place. What was it about this story that pulled you in?
Well, thank you, Joshua Dubois. Thank you, and all 1,000 of you who are participating for all of your support here. I love that question because as Bishop McKenzie was just speaking about knowing about her prior to this book, I also lived and worked and was a member of the community, went to Bethel AME Church every Sunday. It covered stories at Morgan State University, spoke in Morgan State University, in and around Baltimore, and the news reporter did stories every single day on the community. Had done stories at Johns Hopkins as a reporter. And in my 8 years of being a member of the community, a contributing member of the community, I had never heard the name Henrietta Lacks or HeLa cells mentioned. And I was astounded by my own ignorance of that. I was confounded by it because when I read the book, I went, how can I have lived in Baltimore all this time, been on the same streets where she lived, worked on the same streets where she lived and worked, Henrietta and Deborah Lacks, and yet never heard of her. And I always figure that if because I understand the common thread and the commonality in the human experience, I know that if I don't know that story, there's at least 1 million other people who don't know that story. And so because Rebecca Skloot had done such an excellent job of persevering, her tenacity and determination to get the story told through Deborah Lacks, I thought, well, I could best bring light to that by turning it into a film and getting more people to know who she was and what her contributions were. And it took a while to get the right kind of support for the film because we had gone through a couple of different scriptwriters, and it was only because George Wolfe and I had been talking about working on another project. I wanted to work with George Wolfe more than anything. I always thought somebody else should have played the role. George Wolfe said, you definitely should do it, do Deborah. I know a way in, and the way into the story, George said, is through the eyes of Deborah and her search for her mother's identity. And what Bishop McKenzie just said earlier about we know who we are based upon what has happened to us in the past, knowing who you are and the price that was paid for you is of value to every human being. It was of particular value to Deborah, who didn't know her mother, who didn't, nobody in the family talked about it. And we all come from families and a culture that many things are left unsaid and unspoken when you really don't know the answers, or you're embarrassed or ashamed of what the answers might unfold. And so her determination and really deep yearning and seeking to know who her mother was is what drew me to the story.
That's wonderful. Well, thank God for Deborah, and thank you for finding that way in.
Thank God for Deborah, and also thank God for Rebecca Skloot. I have to say that for this young white woman to pursue with such determination and drive to figure out what had actually happened to Henrietta Lacks was really, really profound on her part.
Absolutely, absolutely. Next question that folks had, Oprah, were there any memorable moments from the production that you'd like to share? Being on set, being in and around Baltimore.
Well, it was homecoming for me to come back to Baltimore because I feel like I got my woman chops in Baltimore. I came in there when I was 22 and left when I was 30 and went on to Chicago. So it was like homecoming for me being in Baltimore. I would have to say that coming to town first, because both HBO, George, and myself all wanted to meet with the family before we started this process. And I wanted to meet with the family. I felt it was important. HBO felt it was important. George felt it was important. George Wolf, the director. We all felt it was important to sit down with them and have a conversation and allow a sense of collaboration on what they understood or knew about both Deborah Lacks and Henrietta Lacks. Also was important to me because, you know, a film and a book is one thing, and the life that a person lived is something completely, is their life. So I wanted the family to know that we, the filmmakers, were going to do our utmost in our own integrity to present the spirit and essence of this story, but that in no way could I be everything that they wanted their mother to be on screen, because each person has their own personal memories of what their relationship is. And so a film can only present a piece of that to the world. So I look at every piece of work that I do, whether it was, 25 years of the talk show or, the series that we do on OWN, and now this film. I look at everything that I do. My work is an expression and an offering to the public, and however it is received, I feel blessed by that. I do the work, I offer it to the world, and release it, and then release it.
Yeah, and we'll take it from there, certainly.
Okay.
So, the three final questions over. Some folks asked, actually this was a big theme in what came in about African Americans in medical research. John Strong said, do you think there are going to be lingering effects because of Henrietta's story in terms of creating a pejorative view of the medical establishment among African Americans? Shaka Cunningham asked, how can we overcome the distrust of the medical establishment that the Henrietta Lacks story has caused?
I think everybody needs to know that you can still have your cells taken and used for research and you not know it. I think the law now says that they cannot take your cells and have your name on those cells and you not know it. But I think cells are still being taken and used for research. And, I think in many cases, Johns Hopkins has gotten taken a lot of heat for sharing those cells with the world, but they maintain, and I believe, they never made a profit from the cells. It's all of the drug companies that have now made a profit from the cells. I feel that the family being upset that they never received any compensation for the cells is a valid feeling. I mean, when you have family members who cannot afford health care and billions of dollars, I mean billions of dollars have been made from your mother's cells, I would be upset too. But trying to determine the first drug company and all of the millions and millions and millions of variations of way that the cells have been dispersed, that's a lawsuit I wouldn't want to be in.
Yeah. That would be a tough one, my goodness.
That's an ongoing battle. But, I mean, I do understand some family members who are still upset that they, don't have the money to even get their teeth fixed, and yet people are making money off of their grandmother's cells.
Absolutely. Two final questions, Oprah. Our friend Michelle Norris asked a great question. She said the story of how author Rebecca Ruth built an audience for her book is in and of itself an interesting story. She built her own networks, covered the ground like dew. She's responsible for muscling her way onto the New York Times bestseller list. Is there a lesson in that model in terms of building an audience? And I would add, is both Rebecca and your work on this film, why is it important to fight for stories like this?
Well, my whole life has been about lifting us up. First, it was lifting myself and being a light, because I come from this background of studying every black woman whose story I could get my hands on. I grew up reciting Fannie Lou Hamer and Sojourner Truth and doing doing, Easter speeches in the church, and every time there was any story about a black woman, I would try to learn it and memorize it and share it with other people. The lifting, because I always saw myself through these women. That's why the very first time I did the movie, The Color Purple, I had not had one acting lesson in my life, but I knew that character Sophia because of Fannie Lou Hamer, because of Sojourner Truth, because of my aunts, because of the people and the women I saw sitting in the church, in the pews every Sunday. I was familiar with that woman, that character, that kind of strength from, African American women. I think it's important every time, as Bishop McKenzie was saying, every time I find a story that I hadn't heard, where a person of color has made a mark in history and nobody knows about it. I feel lifted by that. I feel strengthened by that. I gain strength from their strength. And I want to share that because I believe that other people seeing the normalcy, how normal Henrietta Lacks and Deborah Lacks were, but yet what an extraordinary contribution they both were able to make is important, because you can then see that in yourself. You can see that ordinary people can do extraordinary things through their faith, through their belief, and through their hard work. So I am a believer of telling stories that shine a light on the goodness of us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for fighting for those stories. A quick side note for those on the line: our closing prayer leader, Dr. Otis Moss Jr., Oprah mentioned Fannie Lou Hamer a few times. He actually stayed at Dr. Moss's house a number of times.
Oh, my goodness.
We're with the living legend. But last question, Oprah, a lot of folks asked, what takeaways do you think people should take away from this film? What do you want people walking away on April 22nd, and when they finish watching HBO or gathering around somebody's coffee table watching this at 8 o'clock? What do you want people walking away from?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I don't actually have an outcome, because I learned when I did the movie Beloved in 1998, and I didn't have you, Joshua, to help me with the community, so not a lot of people went to see that movie. I learned from that experience, do the work, allow God to work through you with the work, offer it, and however it is received, I feel blessed by what that outcome is. And so some people will be touched. George Wolfe did such an extraordinary job of telling the story through the eyes of Deborah, and you get to know this family. And everybody recognizes themselves sitting around the kitchen table when the family's arguing, when the family's, sitting around talking about, sweet potato pie and, neck bones. Everybody recognizes what that means when you see Cut and Cootie and you pull up in the yard and you haven't seen your family in a long time and you're going down south. So there is a familiarity and a resonance that happens that George was able to create, and all of the actors and everybody who was a part of this team, that you come away seeing yourself reflected on screen through the lives of these characters, but also filled with a sense of your own fight, determination, and hope. So that's what I am feeling when I see it. So I'm sure if I'm feeling that, then some other people will feel the same. But, we offered it as an artful expression of what it means for Deborah. For Deborah, it was purely an act of faith. She never stopped believing. Going to church every day. Her husband was a minister, and she, tried to preach herself sometimes. But she never stopped believing that God would make a way that she would come to know who her mother was. And I think, in the end, when she finally passes away, before the book comes out, it's because she has made peace with this story. So I think everybody will sense that from the film.
Man, well, we can't wait to see it, Oprah. We are with you at 8 o'clock on April 22nd and well beyond as well. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you may have to run in a bit. We have a few more amazing speakers that we're going to hear from. Folks, Remember, please stay on the line. We have some important information to share with you. Tweet, post now, hashtag Henrietta Lacks. As you've heard from Bishop McKenzie and from Oprah, this is a critically important story that we must remember. So, Oprah,
and may I just say this, Josh? Josh, may I interrupt you and say this? I knew from the beginning that I was not going to be able to get people to get out of their homes and go to the movies and pay money to see a story about this black woman who has contributed so much to science. So the perfect partner for me was HBO, because HBO isn't really TV, it's HBO. And it's an elevated experience that you get to have in your home. So the benefit of being able to watch from the comfort of your home, I thought, would allow more people to actually be exposed to the story. So I really appreciate you and everybody on this line, because all I got to do is, it's a click. It's just a click, y'all. It's a click. 8 o'clock, April 22nd. It's a click. You don't have to put on the shoes. We don't know what you're wearing. You can eat. You can watch the TV. You can have dinner. You can have friends over. So it's just a click. And the interesting thing about it, they know every time you click. So I really appreciate the support that I'm getting on this call.
Well, y'all get your clicking fingers ready. 8 o'clock Eastern. If you don't have HBO, find someone that does. If you do, we need you to click. This is a critically important story. So, Oprah, thanks again. Friends, stay on. We have a few more things to share, even after our next speaker. But we're so excited to have someone on the line who can give us some perspective about what this all means. Dr. Alondra Nelson is one of the country's leading experts at the intersection of race and science, particularly related to DNA. Alondra is the Dean of Social Science at Columbia University and the incoming president of the Social Science Research Council. Her groundbreaking books, including The Social Life of DNA, listen to this, Race, Reparation, and Reconciliation After the Genome, have really kind of shook up the country's conversation on these topics. Dr. Nelson, why does Henrietta Lacks matter? For science, for the black community, and for our country? Put this in perspective. Put her in perspective.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. Henrietta Lacks matters because she offers us the untold story of African American contributions to science and biomedicine that often go untold. So 1951, at a time when our hospitals, when our medical schools, when our nursing schools were segregated, when people who wanted to make African Americans' contributions to science and medicine weren't able to do so, here we have, unwittingly and not by her own knowledge, Henrietta Lacks making an invaluable contribution, and we now know an immortal contribution. These are HeLa cells are basically cancer cells. They are cells that can kill, but they are also cells that multiply and grow quickly, and that led to significant developments in laboratory research. So within 3 years, by 1951, the cells had been used by the famous scientist Jonas Salk to develop the polio vaccine. Over the next 60 years, the cells have been used to increase our understanding through research of cancer, of HIV/AIDS. They're used to test anti-tumor vaccines. And as was suggested earlier by Oprah Winfrey, people have made money from the use of these cells. There's over 10,000 patents involving HeLa cells. So it's not, it's not an overstatement to say that certainly 20th century medicine and now 21st century medicine owes a great deal to Henrietta Lacks and her sacrifice.
That's phenomenal. Thank you, Alondra. And just a quick question for you that came in. Sandra Millen Underwood asked, what do you believe that healthcare clinicians and researchers should do to help men and women in our community better understand the benefits of clinical research and biobanking in this era of genetics and precision medicine, while also keeping cognizant of the concerns as well? What can be done to familiarize our community more with the importance of this type of research?
That's a great question. I mean, given the history of scientific racism, genetics has always been a complicated space, particularly for African Americans. It was genetic research, a space that tried to make pseudoscientific, spurious claims about black bodies and black biology and about its distinctions from other types of bodies and other types of genetics of other people. But, it's also a place, as we know from President Obama, started a precision medicine initiative just, within a year before he left office. And it's also our ability potentially to extend human life and to give us all healthier lives. So it's a very complicated space. And I think that, one of the powerful things about both the book by Rebecca Skloot and also the movie is how stories help us to make sense of complicated spaces and complicated paradoxes like the intersection between race and genetics. And so the Lacks story shows us, both how clinical trials can be dangerous. I mean, her cells were taken without her knowledge, but also how, particularly in this moment, if they're done with one's permission, if they're done with consultation, with people being fully educated about what's happening, with people knowing when they go to get any kind of examination or to go to the hospital that the forms that they're signing actually are giving permission for people to use their cells like unidentified tissue, often in research. So that's a form of clinical research as well. So what I hope that the film and book did for certain that the HBO film will do is to help us be able to talk about the complicated sort of give and take of being involved in research. And I don't think, as the question really suggests, there's no easy answers, and we often have to decide these things for ourselves.
Absolutely. Well, I think it'll equip us to do that even better after we watch it on April 22nd, 8 p.m. Eastern. So thank you so much, Alondra, for putting this all in perspective. Y'all are staying on the line, and I appreciate you.